Welcome to Lesson 17. Forecasting the future in financial terms requires making reasonable assumptions. This second video in doing the math will help you determine the values that you might choose to use. Now, there is no perfect set of choices. You only have to live with the ones that you make. When forecasting future events, advisors lament over the fact that past performance is no indication of future outcomes. Unfortunately, there is little else to go on except for what has happened in the past. Still, there are two problems with using past data for financial planning in the future. The history of the data is not that long, and well-recorded data only goes back about 100 years or so. Also, keep in mind that actions taken by the government in response to short-term problems can impact longer-term outcomes. Given this conundrum, it is still necessary to make predictions in order to set in place reasonable plans. With this in mind, we're going to discuss making reasonable assumptions about inflation, rate of return, life expectancy, and lastly, safe withdrawal rates. The chart on the screen shows the history of inflation in the United States as represented by the Consumer Price Index. As you can see, it is fairly stable over the last several years. If you're looking to predict inflation over the next 40 years, you might choose the average over the last 98 years, which is 3.22%, the average of the last 40 years, which is 4.3%, the average of the last 20 years, which is 2.39%, or some other measure. If you are forecasting the amount you would need to save in order to retire, the average for the 40 years, 4.3, would be a conservative estimate. The average for the last 20 years, 2.39%, would be pretty optimistic. On the other hand, if you are forecasting your income, the 40-year average will be optimistic and the 20-year average will be pessimistic. In your own work, you will have to make your own choices. Since you only get one life to live to test your assumptions, there is a reasonable argument to always go for the conservative or prudent choice. The Consumer Price Index is the most popular statement of inflation in the United States. It's used by the government to adjust everything from employee salaries to Social Security benefits to tax rate tables. Many planners condemn it for being too high or too low based on its academic shortcomings. In your own calculations, you will have to make up your own mind. Rates of return on investments are even more volatile than inflation, and even more confusing. The table on the screen describes the average rates for returns for various running periods in the U.S. stock market history from 1928 throughout 2008. As a reminder, the standard deviation is a measure of volatility of the rate of return over that period of time. There are three unforeseen problems in transferring this data. First, these are the result of unmanaged indices, and there is a survivor's bias. Thus, if used with an advisor or with mutual funds, you can probably expect returns to be lower on the order of 1%. Second, a standard deviation of 2.5% across 15 years is a tremendous difference. With a 50-50 split between stocks and bonds in a portfolio, the difference between being one standard deviation low and one standard deviation high is twice as much money. It's therefore imperative that you take a conservative approach if you want a high degree of success. Third, the high standard deviation in the stock portfolio at a shorter time frame is a clue that using high equity investments for short-term goals is a risky proposition. As a reminder, as standard deviation, the larger standard deviation you see, the more volatility or more swings you will see or should expect to see in your rates of return. Selecting a rate of return puts you on the horns of a dilemma. The current financial planner, thinking to take a contrarian approach, if the market has been cycling up trend, be conservative. If the market has been on a downtrend, you'd want to be a little more aggressive. In retirement, planning how long you're going to live is a critical question in trying to assess your retirement needs. Life expectancy is generally measured in years from your current age. The most typical measure is median life expectancy or 50th percentile. That is, the number of years during which half of the people your age will die. Obviously, this is a speculative choice analysis, and there are many such tables around. The life expectancy table used for calculating required withdrawals for retirement accounts indicates that the life expectancy for a person born today is 82.4 years. So in other words, somebody born today would live approximately to 82.4 years of age. This is not a linear relationship because life expectancy of a person of 1 is 81.6. Thus, half the people born today are expected to live until they're 82.4, and half the people born a year ago are expected to live to only to 81.6. Why is this? The obvious answer is that the people who died between birth and age 1 are not accounted for in the second set. In other words, people who are already 85 have a better chance of reaching 86 than people that are age 70 today. In thinking about life expectancy, you would want to be sure that you have enough money to last until a pretty old age. Expressed as a percentile, you might want to be sure that you would have enough money to live to the age that you might exceed only 10% of the time. Others might want to live, others might want to be more sure that they have enough money and thus select a higher percentile, perhaps a 5th percentile. An optimistic person might want to look at the 25th percentile. Joint life expectancy is the number of years until the last between the two people in a couple is expected to die. It's always higher than the life expectancy of either, more or less because there are two people involved. Here we see the effect of joint life expectancy. Whereas the individual are expected to live until their 80s, there's a good chance that one will live until 90. The above table is constructed based upon a median life expectancy and before taking into consideration anyone's particular long-lived family health history or their health history. Safe withdrawal rate is a percentage of assets that can be withdrawn from a retirement account during the first year of retirement. It can be increased by inflation each year of retirement with a high degree of certainty that there will be enough to last throughout retirement. This is a very simplified way of evaluating retirement in a goal-based plan. It presumes that there will be constantly trending value with no step function to worry about. If you divide the need for retirement spending by a safe withdrawal rate, you get the amount of money that you would need to accumulate for retirement. Ranges of outcomes from the current research puts that value between 4.1 and 5.5%. While this seems like a very small range, consider a person with a $60,000 need. Assuming a safe withdrawal rate of 4.25%, they would need $1.46 million. Assuming a withdrawal rate of 5.5%, they would need $1.09 million. The most significant difference between the various papers seemed to be the amount of intervention proposed in the annual increase with the withdrawal. If you want to be able to stick to the inflation percentages, increase regardless of how the world may change, you maybe want to be closer to 4.25% as a prudent measure. If you're prepared to adjust your lifestyle to fit the circumstances, then taking less when returns are low and refrain from the opportunity to make up when the markets are good, then you can consider choices towards the top of the range. However, there are no guarantees that the one you choose will work. Being a professional planner and dealing with this on a regular basis, I typically recommend clients lean towards a lower rate of return. Ultimately, money can be spent later on in life in unexpected ways, such as health insurance, or health costs, or any other expenses that you have to deal with at a later age. While it's all well and good to make conservative choices about the assumptions in planning for retirement, it needs to be remembered that every dollar saved for retirement needs to come out of today's spending. Thus, following a plan with ultra-conservative assumptions means denial of current wants or even needs today. The effects of conservative assumptions in multiple variables is geometric, as illustrated in the table above. Let's consider that a 35-year-old starting to save for retirement and he wants to retire at 65. How much does he need to save each year given conservative assumptions for all variables versus a slightly less aggressive set? If you are thinking that he needs to save more than twice as much per year, you would be correct. Ultimately, a plan must be reasonable and achievable, or you will need to change your goals. In this case, it would be when to retire or how much to spend in retirement.